In today's story, a powerful lawyer humiliates a delivery driver in front of everyone, then fires him from his building. He called him incompetent, worthless, a waste of space. But 3 weeks later, in the middle of the biggest trial of his career, that lawyer would need help from the one person he destroyed. This is a story about power, about karma, and about why you should never burn bridges with people you think are beneath you. Stay until the end. The moment that lawyer realizes his mistake, it's pure justice. It was 7:45 on a Wednesday morning in downtown Chicago. The city was already awake, taxis honking, people rushing to work, coffee shops packed with the morning crowd. And weaving through the traffic on a bicycle was a man named Carlos Mendoza. 29 years old, average height, friendly face, always wore a smile, even when the weather was terrible. He worked as a delivery driver for QuickBite, one of those app-based food delivery services that had exploded in the past few years. It wasn't the job Carlos had dreamed of. He'd gone to community college, studied business administration, wanted to open his own restaurant someday. But life had other plans. His father got sick, medical bills piled up, Carlos dropped out to work full-time and help his family. And now, 7 years later, he was still delivering food on a bicycle. But Carlos didn't complain. He worked hard, he was always on time, he treated every customer with respect, even when they didn't deserve it. And he had a rule: no matter what happened during his day, he'd find something to be grateful for. Today, he was grateful for the sunshine. Carlos checked his phone. New delivery order: cappuccino, egg white sandwich, fresh orange juice. Deliver to Sterling and Associates Law Firm, 45th floor. Carlos knew the building, one of those massive skyscrapers downtown, fancy law firm, expensive suits, people who made more in a day than Carlos made in a month. He picked up the order from the cafe, secured it carefully in his delivery bag, and headed into the lobby. The security guard recognized him. "Morning, Jimmy," Carlos said with a smile. "How's your daughter?" "Starting college next month," Jimmy said, beaming with pride. "That's amazing, man. Congratulations." Carlos took the elevator up to the 45th floor. The doors opened to reveal a sleek, modern office, glass walls, leather furniture, the kind of place that screamed money and power. A receptionist looked up as Carlos approached. "Delivery for Mr. Harrington," Carlos said politely. The receptionist barely glanced at him. "Leave it on the counter." "I need a signature." She sighed, signed the tablet without looking, and went back to her computer. Carlos placed the bag on the counter carefully. And then the elevator doors opened again. A man stepped out. Tall, late 30s, expensive navy suit, perfectly styled hair, a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Carlos's rent. His name was Richard Harrington, and he was in a very bad mood. Richard Harrington was a partner at Sterling and Associates, one of the top corporate lawyers in the city. He'd built his career on being ruthless, aggressive, winning at all costs. He represented Fortune 500 companies, closed multi-million-dollar deals, had a win rate that made other lawyers jealous. But today, he was stressed. He was in the middle of a massive case, a corporate fraud trial that had been all over the news. His client, Vincent Shaw, a tech CEO, was accused of embezzling $43 million from his own company. Richard knew Shaw was guilty. Everyone knew Shaw was guilty. But that wasn't Richard's problem. His problem was winning the case anyway. And right now, things weren't looking good. Richard walked into the office, already on his phone. "I don't care what the prosecution has. Find me something I can use, anything." He hung up and walked straight to the reception desk, where Carlos was standing. Richard grabbed the delivery bag without even looking at Carlos. He opened it and pulled out the sandwich. Then he froze. "Are you kidding me?" Richard said. Carlos looked up. "Is something wrong, sir?" Richard held up the sandwich. "This has cheese on it." Carlos checked his phone. "The order says egg white sandwich with—"
"I don't care what the order says," Richard interrupted. "I specifically told them no cheese. I'm lactose intolerant." "I'm sorry, sir. I just deliver what the restaurant gives me, but I can call them and—" "I don't have time for this," Richard snapped. He threw the sandwich back into the bag. "This is unacceptable." "I understand. Let me contact the restaurant and get you a replacement." "Do you have any idea how busy I am?" Richard said, his voice rising. "I have a trial starting in 2 hours. I don't have time to wait for you to fix your mistake." "Sir, I didn't make the sandwich. I just—" "You're the one standing here, aren't you?" Richard said coldly. "You're the face of the service, so when the service screws up, that's on you." The receptionist looked uncomfortable. A few associates walking by slowed down, watching. Carlos stayed calm. "I apologize for the inconvenience. If you'd like, I can personally go back to the cafe and—" "Forget it," Richard said, waving his hand dismissively. "I'll just skip breakfast. Again." He turned to the receptionist. "Call QuickBite. Tell them I want this delivery driver removed from deliveries to this building. I don't want to see him again." Carlos's heart sank. "Sir, please, I need this job." Richard turned back to him, eyes cold. "Then maybe you should be better at it." He walked towards his office. Carlos stood there, frozen. The receptionist gave him a sympathetic look. "I'm sorry." Carlos nodded slowly, picked up his delivery bag, and headed back to the elevator. As the doors closed, he took a deep breath. He'd been through worse. He'd survived this too.
1 hour later, Carlos was back on his bike, trying to shake off what had happened. He'd received an email from QuickBite Management. They'd received a complaint from Richard Harrington. The complaint said Carlos was unprofessional and incompetent, and as a result, Carlos was banned from making deliveries to any businesses in the Sterling building. It wasn't fair, but there was nothing Carlos could do about it. He picked up another order and kept working. By noon, he was delivering lunch to a small office building across town. As he locked his bike and grabbed the food, he noticed something. Across the street, there was a commotion. 2 men were arguing loudly on the sidewalk. One of them was older, maybe 65, gray hair, business casual clothes. The other was younger, 30s, leather jacket, aggressive body language. The younger man was pointing at the older man. "You owe me money." "I don't owe you anything," the older man said, his voice shaking. "We had a deal," the younger man said. "You signed the papers. You agreed to pay." "That wasn't a real contract. You tricked me. You—" The younger man grabbed the older man's shirt. "Don't call me a liar." Carlos watched, concerned. The older man looked terrified. "Please, just leave me alone." "Not until you pay up," the younger man said, and then he shoved the older man, hard. The older man stumbled backward, hit the curb, and fell. Carlos didn't think. He just reacted. He dropped his delivery bag and ran across the street. "Hey!" Carlos shouted. "Leave him alone!" The younger man turned, surprised. "This doesn't concern you." "You just assaulted him," Carlos said firmly. "I'm calling the police." The younger man's eyes narrowed. "You really want to do this?" "Yeah," Carlos said, pulling out his phone. "I do." The younger man looked at Carlos, then at the older man on the ground, then back at Carlos, and then he ran. He sprinted down the street and disappeared around a corner. Carlos immediately knelt down next to the older man. "Are you okay, sir?" The older man was shaken but not seriously hurt. I think so." Carlos helped him sit up. "What's your name?" "Martin. Martin Cho." "I'm Carlos. Do you need me to call an ambulance?" "No, I'm all right. Just shaken up." "What was that about?" Carlos asked. Martin's face darkened. "That man, he works for a company that scammed me.
They got me to sign a predatory loan contract, and now they're trying to collect money I don't actually owe." "That's illegal," Carlos said. "I know," Martin said sadly, "but I don't have the money to fight it. I contacted lawyers, but they all said it would cost more than I could afford." Carlos's jaw tightened. "That's not right." Martin shrugged. "That's life." Carlos helped Martin to his feet. "Are you sure you're okay? Can I call someone for you?" "I'll be fine. Thank you, really. If you hadn't been here—" "Don't mention it," Carlos said. Martin gave him a grateful smile, then slowly walked away. Carlos watched him go, feeling anger burn in his chest. People like Martin got taken advantage of because they didn't have power, because they couldn't afford lawyers, because the system wasn't built for them. Carlos picked up his delivery bag and got back on his bike, but he couldn't stop thinking about Martin, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just witnessed something important. That evening, Carlos couldn't get Martin out of his head. After his shift ended, he went to the public library and looked up information about predatory lending. He found articles, legal resources, consumer protection agencies, and then he found something interesting. A news article about a class action lawsuit against Loan Shark Financial Services, a company accused of using illegal contracts to exploit low-income borrowers. Carlos's eyes widened. That was the company Martin had mentioned. The article said the lawsuit was being heard in court next month, and it named the defense attorney representing Loan Shark, Richard Harrington. Carlos stared at the screen. Of course it was him. The same man who'd humiliated Carlos that morning was now defending the company that scammed Martin. Carlos felt sick. But then he had an idea. He pulled out his phone and called Martin. It took a few tries, but Carlos managed to track down Martin's number through the business card Martin had given him earlier. "Hello," Martin answered. "Mr. Cho, it's Carlos, the guy who helped you this morning." "Oh, yes, Carlos. Is everything all right?" "I wanted to ask you something," Carlos said. "The man who pushed you today, did you get a good look at him?" "Yes, unfortunately. His face is burned into my memory." "And you said he works for Loan Shark Financial." "That's what he told me." Carlos took a deep breath. "Mr. Cho, there's a class action lawsuit against that company, and I think what happened to you today could be evidence." "What do you mean?" Martin asked. "That man assaulted you. He tried to extort you money using an illegal contract. That's a crime. And if you're willing to testify—" "Testify?" Martin's voice wavered. "I don't know if I can do that. These people are dangerous." "I understand," Carlos said gently. "But you wouldn't be alone. There are other victims, and if you speak up, you could help stop them from hurting more people." Martin was silent. Then he said, "You really think it would make a difference?" "I do," Carlos said, "and I'll help you. I saw what happened. I can testify too." Martin let out a shaky breath. Okay, I'll do it." "Good," Carlos said. "I'll contact the prosecution and let them know what we witnessed." After he hung up, Carlos found the contact information for the legal team prosecuting Loan Shark. He sent a detailed email explaining what he'd seen that day: the assault, the extortion attempt, everything. He included Martin's contact information and offered to testify as a witness. And then he hit send, and he waited.
2 weeks passed. Carlos received a call from the prosecution team. They wanted to meet with him and Martin. They said Carlos's testimony could be crucial to the case because the man who'd assaulted Martin, his name was Derek Mills, and he was a senior collections agent for Loan Shark Financial. If the prosecution could prove that Loan Shark Financial employees were using violence and intimidation to collect on illegal contracts, that would destroy the company's defense, and it would destroy Richard Harrington's case. Carlos met with the prosecutors. He gave a statement, signed a deposition, agreed to testify in court. Martin did the same. The prosecutors were thrilled. "This changes everything," one of them said. "Thank you for coming forward." Carlos nodded. "I just want to do the right thing." As Carlos left the meeting, he thought about Richard Harrington, the man who'd humiliated him, called him incompetent, gotten him banned from the building. That same man was about to lose his case because of Carlos. The irony was almost too perfect. 3 weeks later, the trial. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, victims of Loan Shark Financial, lawyers, spectators. Richard Harrington sat at the defense table, looking confident as always. He'd prepared for this case meticulously. He had experts, documents, a strategy designed to confuse the jury and cast doubt on the prosecution's claims. He was ready, or so he thought. The judge called the court to order. The prosecution stood up. "Your Honor, we'd like to call our next witness, Carlos Mendoza." Richard looked up, confused. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. The courtroom doors opened, and Carlos Mendoza walked in. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt and slacks. His hair was neatly combed. He looked nervous but determined. He walked to the witness stand and was sworn in. Richard stared at him, and then it hit him. The delivery driver. The one he'd yelled at. The one he'd gotten banned from his building. Richard's stomach dropped. The prosecution began. "Mr. Mendoza, can you tell the court what you witnessed on the afternoon of September 14th? Carlos took a deep breath. "Yes, I was making a delivery when I saw a man assault another man on the sidewalk. The victim's name was Martin Cho." "And did you recognize the assailant?" "Not at the time, but I later learned his name was Derek Mills. He works for Loan Shark Financial." The courtroom murmured. "And what did Mr. Mills say to Mr. Cho before assaulting him?" Carlos recounted the entire incident, the argument, the threats, the shove, the extortion attempt. Richard tried to object. "Your Honor, this is hearsay." "Overruled," the judge said. "This witness is testifying to events he personally observed." The prosecution continued. "Mr. Mendoza, why did you decide to come forward?" Carlos looked directly at the jury. "Because what I saw was wrong. That man was being victimized by a company that knew he couldn't fight back, and I couldn't just stand by and let it happen." The jury was captivated. The prosecutor smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Mendoza. No further questions." Now it was Richard's turn. He stood up, his mind racing. He walked toward Carlos, trying to look confident. "Mr. Mendoza," Richard began, "isn't it true that you have a personal grudge against me?" Carlos blinked. "Excuse me?" "We've met before, haven't we?" Richard said. Carlos hesitated. "Yes. And during that meeting, I filed a complaint against you with your employer, didn't I?" "You did. So you're here today because you want revenge, isn't that right?" Carlos looked at Richard calmly. "No, I'm here because I witnessed a crime. What happened between you and me has nothing to do with what I saw that day." "Really?" Richard said, his tone sharp. "Because it seems awfully convenient that you're testifying against my client just weeks after I complained about your service." Carlos didn't flinch. "I didn't even know you were the defense attorney until I'd already contacted the prosecution." Richard paused. "And even if I had known," Carlos continued, "I would have come forward anyway, because Mr. Cho deserved someone to stand up for him, and that's what I did." The courtroom was silent. Richard stared at Carlos, realizing he had nothing, no way to discredit him, no way to shake his testimony. "No further questions," Richard said quietly. Carlos stepped down from the witness stand. As he walked past Richard, their eyes met, and in that moment, Richard saw something he'd never expected to see in a delivery driver. Dignity, strength, integrity, everything Richard had spent his career pretending to have. Carlos left the courtroom, and Richard knew his case was over.
The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they came back, the verdict was clear. Guilty on all counts. Loan Shark Financial was ordered to pay $47 million in restitution to victims. Their business license was revoked, and Derek Mills was arrested for assault and extortion. Richard sat at the defense table, stunned. It was the first major case he'd lost in 5 years. His reputation was damaged, his firm was furious, his career was in jeopardy. And it was all because of a delivery driver he dismissed as worthless. After the trial, Richard left the courthouse and found Carlos standing outside. Carlos was talking to Martin, who was crying with relief. Richard hesitated. Then he walked over. "Mr. Mendoza," Richard said quietly. Carlos turned. "Mr. Harrington?" Richard swallowed his pride. "I owe you an apology." Carlos waited. "I treated you terribly," Richard said. "I was rude, dismissive. I judged you based on your job, and I was wrong." Carlos nodded slowly. "You were. I want you to know, what you did in there today took courage, real courage, and I respect that." Carlos looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "I didn't do it for you. I did it for Mr. Cho, and for all the people your client hurt." Richard nodded. "I know. But I'll accept your apology," Carlos said, "because everyone deserves a second chance." Richard's eyes glistened. "Thank you." Carlos extended his hand. Richard shook it, and in that handshake, something shifted. Richard walked away a different man. 3 months later, Richard Harrington left Sterling & Associates. He started a new practice, a small firm, pro bono work, helping people who couldn't afford legal representation, people like Martin. It wasn't as glamorous, it didn't pay as well, but for the first time in years, Richard felt like he was doing something that mattered. As for Carlos, he kept delivering food, but he also started taking night classes again. He was going to finish his degree, open that restaurant he'd always dreamed of. And he knew without a doubt that he'd make it happen, because Carlos had something that money couldn't buy: character. And that's worth more than any victory in any courtroom. Richard Harrington learned that lesson the hard way, but he learned it. And sometimes that's all we can ask for. Never judge someone by their job title, because the person you dismiss today might be the one who holds your fate in their hands tomorrow. Power isn't permanent. Respect should be universal. And the people you overlook are often the ones with the most integrity. That's a lesson every successful person needs to learn. Some learn it early. Others learn it in a courtroom.